Lesson 25. Adjectives of the third declension, the genitive with adjectives. Hi everyone, welcome back to Lenny's Latin class. Today we're on page 73 in lesson 25. And the main big thing we need to talk about today is adjectives of the third declension. So far, all the adjectives that you know are what we call first and second declension adjectives. Here's a random example of a first and second declension adjective. The adjective quartus, which means fourth. And they call it a first and second declension adjective because it follows the endings of the first and second declension. So if you see it listed in a dictionary, it might say quartus, quarta, quartum. If it's feminine, it'll take the endings of the first declension. If it's modifying a feminine noun. If it's modifying a masculine noun, it'll take the endings of the second declension, masculine. If it's modifying a neuter noun, it'll take the endings of the second declension, but the neuter endings. So, adjectives like that follow that pattern, we call them first and second declension adjectives. And they're really easy to keep up with because they're so simple. They just follow the first and second declension endings. Today, it gets a little bit more complicated because we have another flavor of adjectives that we need to learn about in Latin, and that's called third declension adjectives. As the name suggests, these are adjectives that take the endings of the third declension. Okay, so this is a whole different class of adjectives, a whole different kind of adjective with a whole different kind of pattern to its endings. Okay, so forget everything you know about first and second declension adjectives. Just, park that somewhere else and, change the channel to this new kind of adjective that we're going to talk about. Okay, so third declension adjectives, that's the big focus for today. Let's look at section 209 and let's read what they have there. It'll be a good introduction for us. It says, nominative singular. A few adjectives of the third declension have a different form for each gender in the nominative singular and are called adjectives of three endings. And they give an example here. They say acer, acris, acre. This kind of adjective is also known as an adjective of three terminations. You'll see it sometimes called adjectives of three endings, other times called adjectives of three terminations. Same thing. So what are they saying exactly? What are they telling us about that kind of adjective? What they're saying is that in the nominative case, in the singular, each gender will have its own separate form, its own different form. Okay, so acer, that's the masculine nominative singular form. Acris, that's the feminine nominative singular form. Acre is the neuter nominative singular form. Okay, that's adjectives of three endings or adjectives of three terminations. Moving on, we have another kind of third declension adjective. It says here, continuing on, many have one form for the masculine and feminine and another for the neuter. These are called adjectives of two endings. Okay, also known as adjectives of two terminations. And they give an example here, fortis, forte. Okay, when you see two of them listed like that, in this book at least, the first one means masculine and feminine. So fortis is masculine nominative singular, fortis is feminine nominative singular, and forte is neuter nominative singular. Okay, so masculine and feminine are the same, neuter is different. So you have two different forms or two different endings. So it gets the term or the name adjectives of two endings or adjectives of two terminations. Continuing on, some have the same form for all genders. And what they mean is in the nominative singular. And these are called adjectives of one ending. And they have an example here, potens. So potens, if you just see that sitting there by itself, it could be masculine nominative singular or feminine or neuter nominative singular. Now, you may be asking the question, with all these different types of third declension adjectives, how am I supposed to learn all this? How am I supposed to get used to these endings? And the answer is that you just memorize a couple of the different paradigms and you start to see the pattern. And also you get to know which adjective is which adjectives have which pattern. And when you do that a little bit, you just start to get the pattern in your head, okay? Okay, so we have third declension adjectives of 3 endings or terminations, of 2 endings or terminations, and of 1 ending or termination. But there's more to talk about the, in scholarly terms, what we would refer to as the morphology of these adjectives. That's the forms as far as what endings they take. And so let's take a look here at section 210, and they're going to tell us something really important about third declension adjectives, okay? Section 210 says, endings. Most adjectives of the third declension, except comparatives, have I in the ablative singular, IUM in the genitive plural, IS or ES in the accusative masculine and feminine plural. What they're talking about there is the accusative plural. And then IA in the nominative and accusative neuter plural. So I'd like you to take a moment here, look at the information given in section 210, and I want you to put on your thinking cap for a minute and think to yourself, does this remind me of anything? Do the characteristics described here remind you of anything we've talked about in the past? Have you come up with anything? What I'm hoping it reminded you of is third declension I stem nouns, okay? All these characteristics here, having a long I in the ablative singular, IUM in the genitive plural, IA for neuters in the nominative plural and accusative plural. All those characteristics there, all those endings, those are the characteristics of what we call third declension I stem nouns. And if I recall correctly, we discussed this in lesson 17. Of course, this is a recorded lecture series, so there's no reason for me to repeat a whole lot of this, because you can simply go back and, listen to a past lecture, well, really as many times as you want. But I will just give you a quick review. The way that third declension I stem nouns were explained to me is as follows. That at one point there was an I at the end of the stem, okay? When it comes to a noun, what is it that we call the stem? What is the stem? The way I learned it is it's called the genitive stem. So let's just take a random third declension noun like legio. Legio is the nominative singular form. The genitive singular would be legionis. And if we chop off the I on the S, that's the genitive singular ending. If we chop that off, we get legion. So by removing the ending from the genitive singular, we get what's called the genitive stem. Some people just call it the stem. Some people call it the base. Some people call it the genitive stem. I call it the genitive stem just because that's just what I call it. It's the way I've seen it in textbooks. Anyway, you add the endings of the third declension to that genitive stem. So the way it was explained to me is that third declension I stem nouns, the reason they're called I stem is because they had the letter I at the end of the stem. Somehow that I went away or got obscured. And I can show you what I mean here. If you turn to page 250, look at the top of the page there, you'll see 2 paradigms for kubile and animal, 2 nouns of the third declension, which both happen to be neuter, okay? These are what we call true I stem nouns of the third declension. So these are third declension I stems. For kubile, the genitive stem is cubil, and then the genitive singular ending would be is. So Cubilis in the genitive singular. But imagine for a moment that the real genitive stem is not just cubil, but instead cubili. If that were the case, like in the dative singular, if you add another I to the stem, you'd get cubilii. You'd get two I's at the end. The way it was explained to me is that third declension I stems do something where the I that's at the end of the stem blends in or contracts with the vowel that follows it. So in the dative singular, instead of cubilii, it just contracts down to one I, and you get cubili. In the dative plural, cubilibus, instead of cubiliibus, the two I's contract together, and you just get cubilibus instead of cubiliibus. So that's the way it was explained to me, is that the I has become obscured by blending in or contracting with other vowels. But in some places, it pops up, like, for example, the genitive plural. Look at the genitive plural, cubilium. Okay, the ending for the genitive plural in the third declension is just supposed to be um, but we have ium there. Where did that I come from? And look at the nominative plural, cubilia. The ending for neuter nominative plurals is just supposed to be the letter A, cubila. Where did the extra I come from? Why did we have cubilia? The answer is that that's the leftover I from the true stem, which really had an I at the end. And so that is why they're called I stems, is because they really, truly had an I at the end of the stem. Okay, that's the way it was explained to me. So sometimes the I goes away and blends with another vowel. Sometimes it pops up. And so that is the nature of third declension adjectives. Third declension adjectives decline like I stem nouns of the third declension. Now, this is not always going to be a perfect thing because, the third declension is kind of a mess. And I've seen grammarians, I believe Allen and Greenow, I've seen them comment that the third declension was even confusing for the Romans. Even the Romans didn't really get it. So if it confused the Romans, then for goodness sake, it's going to confuse us too. So the idea here is that third declension adjectives will have a long I as the ending for the ablative singular most of the time. Occasionally you'll see an E on a couple of certain adjectives. In the genitive plural, you'll see ium. You get an extra I in there before the um, just like an I stem noun of the third declension. And that's the reason also why sometimes for third declension nouns, that's why you see is as the accusative plural ending. Even here we have is and then es in parentheses. The I in the accusative plural ending, that's the I from the end of the stem of an I stem noun. I was just now looking at Allen and Greenow to refresh my memory on this, and they were saying that in poetry, sometimes the poets use different forms than what you'll see in prose. So the rules you're seeing here will not be the case 100% of the time, but they'll be true most of the time. So there are a few nouns in the third declension that are I stems, but they have a letter E as the ablative singular ending. Others, like cubile and animal, those I stem neuters, they have the letter I as their ablative singular ending, even though they're nouns, they're not adjectives. So the best thing for you is just to be aware of the characteristics of I stem nouns of the third declension, so that when you see them, you know what's going on. You go, oh, I see, that's an I stem. That's why that thing is spelled like that. So to make a long story short here, adjectives of the third declension, most of them, decline like an I stem noun of the third declension. a true I stem in the sense that they have an I in the ablative singular ending. Okay, so let's move on a bit and talk about the different kinds of adjectives, that is 3 endings, 2 endings, and 1 ending. Let's talk a bit more about those, and let's turn to the back of the book, to the appendix, as they suggest here, to Appendix 13. So in Appendix 13, on page 252, the first thing we see is aker. That's the example adjective that they give us as an adjective of 3 endings or 3 terminations. And as far as I can tell, most of the adjectives of 3 terminations in the third declension have this ER kind of thing at the end of the nominative singular. Okay, so look at the nominative singular aker. We have ACER, but then in the genitive singular, the E goes away. It's not ACERIS, akeris. It's just akeris. So from the nominative to the genitive, that letter E goes away. In other words, the letter E is not part of the genitive stem. We also see this same kind of phenomenon for some second declension nouns. For example, ager. For ager, the genitive singular is agris. So the E goes away there in the same way as it goes away here in the adjective aker. We have another adjective that we're going to learn in a few minutes, equester. Same thing, it ends in ER, and that's an adjective of 3 terminations. Okay, so that E is there in the masculine nominative singular, but not in the genitive singular, and not in the feminine nominative singular. So when you see adjectives that have ER, like aker or equester, those are going to be the ones that have 3 endings. They'll be classified as adjectives of 3 terminations. Notice that in the accusative plural, you can see ES or IS. You know, it varies. It'll vary depending on if it's poetry or prose. I've been told that different editors like to change the ending. I've been told that in Europe, continental editors like to do it one way, but British editors do it a different way. You know, one prefers ES, one prefers IS. So it has to do with the time period of Latin literature. It has to do with the editor, the writer. It's just, you know, it's going to vary. Notice also in the ablative singular, you have the letter I there as the ending. Notice also genitive plural, you have IUM. Moving on to the top of 253, we have an adjective of 2 terminations, okay? Fortis does not have this ER thing at the end. So the masculine and feminine are the same in the nominative singular. In fact, they're the same in all forms. All 5 cases, singular and plural. Again, you have IUM in the genitive plural. You have IA in the neuter plural, nominative and accusative. Skip over longior for just a minute and go down to potens. This is an adjective of 1 ending or 1 termination. Okay, so in the nominative singular, potens could be masculine, feminine, or neuter. But even though they're the same in the nominative singular, they're not the same in other forms. Like, for example, the accusative. If it's masculine or feminine, the accusative will be potentem. If it's neuter, it's going to be potens. Now, why is that? If it's neuter, the accusative is always the same in the nominative as it is in the accusative. That's just a very hard, fast rule in Latin. And I'll repeat that because it's a rule you can just memorize. In Latin, a neuter noun is going to be the same form in the nominative as it is in the accusative. Accusative and nominative are the same. That's in the singular and plural. Okay, so even though potens doesn't look neuter like you might expect from other nouns you know, the fact is still true that the nominative and accusative are the same. So potens is the nominative and the accusative here for the neuter gender, but in masculine and feminine, the accusative singular is going to be potentem. So potens is an adjective of 1 termination in the sense that it's an adjective of one termination in the nominative singular. That does not extend to every case. In the accusative singular, you have two different endings there. Okay, so this business about being an adjective of one termination, that means in the nominative case. Move back up a moment to longior here on page 253. You'll notice that in the ablative singular, you have the letter E. If your book is not printed very well, like mine, you might be missing the little bar inside the E, and it might look like an O. But that's not an O, that's an E there at the end. It's longiore. So this is an example of a third declension adjective that does not look like an I stem noun. Remember that when they said that third declension adjectives decline like I stems, they said except for comparatives. And that's what longior is. Longior is a comparative. It means longer. So in the genitive plural, you don't have longiorium, you don't have an IUM, you just have UM. There's no I there. And in the neuter plural, you don't have longioria with an IA there, you just have an A, longiora. And in the ablative singular, you don't have longiori, you have longiore. So the comparative, longior, here, that's an example of a third declension adjective that is not like an I stem. Okay? But all the others are like I stems. Okay, that's enough about third declension adjectives for now. Let's move on now to our vocabulary section for this lesson, which is section 211 at the bottom of page 73. Our first new word is prida. That's a feminine noun of the first declension. The A and the E together form what we call a diphthong, which sounds like I, so it sounds like prida, and it means booty or plunder. Next we have institutum, which is a neuter noun of the second declension. The etymology of this word involves the verb statuo, and that's related to English words like statute. Of course, the whole word is related to English words like institute or institution. And so statuo means to establish or set up something. So you put in on the front, and you get in, and the vowel changes from an A to an I. So statuo, instituo. That's a common linguistic thing you see in Latin. When you prefix a verb with a preposition, you often get a vowel change in that first vowel of the original verb. So here you see that phenomenon from an A to an I, statuo to stituo. So an institutum literally is something that's been set up or established. And so in that way it means custom, because our customs are things that are established. Next we have supplicium. That's a neuter noun of the second declension. That means punishment. Another quick linguistic note. Notice that the SUP at the beginning of this word really is the Latin preposition sub, S-U-B. But instead of supplicium, the B at the end of sub, because it's parked right next to a P, it gets sort of absorbed into the sound of the P. And so the B turns into a P. We call that assimilation. So it's really supplicium, but with the B turned into a P, and you get supplicium. And that's a thing you'll see at the beginnings of lots of verbs that are compounded with prepositional prefixes. Next we have equester. This is an adjective of three terminations, as we just studied in this lesson. I mentioned previously that a lot of the adjectives of three terminations or three endings, as far as I can tell, they have the ER at the end of the masculine nominative singular. And so equester is one of those. So in the masculine nominative singular, you'll have equester, feminine, equestris, neuter, equestre. And of course, it's related to our to the Latin word equus, which means horse. And of course, it's related to English words like equestrian The word equestrian means related to horses. So anyway, equester as an adjective in Latin means cavalry related, something that's related to, or as they say here, of the cavalry. By the way, a quick note here, a lot of English speakers mispronounce the word cavalry. They pronounce it as calvary. They switch the L and the V. So cavalry, that means related to horses. Calvary is the traditional site of the crucifixion of Christ. So Calvary and cavalry are two different words. Make sure you pronounce the word cavalry correctly. Next, we have the third declension adjective, Focalis. You can tell from the way it's listed here that it's an adjective of two endings, or two terminations. So Focalis would be nominative singular, masculine, and nominative singular, feminine. And then for the neuter, you get facile. It's not facilis. We don't have the accent on the second syllable. We have it on the first syllable because that second syllable has a short vowel, so it's Focalis. Next, we have Deficiolus. Again, the stress or emphasis is on the third syllable from the end. Deficiolus. It's not Deficiolus. And again, this is an adjective of two terminations. Deficiolus is masculine and feminine, and deficile is neuter. And as it says here, it means difficult. Next, we have gravis, another adjective of two terminations. So gravis would be masculine and feminine, and then grave would be neuter. It means heavy or severe. Of course, in English, we have the word grave, which means, really serious. If you make a grave mistake, it's a severe mistake or a serious mistake. Moving on to the top of page 74, we have Cooperdust. This is a good old-fashioned first and second declension adjective, not one of the third declension adjectives that we've been working with here in this lesson. So it's going to follow the endings of the first and second declension. So we have Cooperdust for masculine, Coopeda for feminine, Coopedum for neuter. And of course, you're already accustomed to all that. And it means eager or desirous. In English, we have related words like cupidious, and it's etymologically related to Cupid, the mythical baby who shoots you with an arrow and makes you fall in love. Below that, we have the word recens, which means new, late, or recent. It's an adjective of one termination, sort of like potens, which we saw in the appendix. The genitive singular would be recentis, and so the genitive stem is recent, just like our English word recent. In fact, we get lots of English words from the genitive stems of third declension Latin words, whether they be nouns or adjectives. Next, we have omnis. That's a third declension adjective of two terminations. In the neuter, you'll have omne, and it means all or every. We're going to see this one a lot. Of course, we have lots of English words that include the word omnis. Like if you say something or someone is omnipresent, it means they're present everywhere. They seem to be everywhere at once. If someone is omniscient, like if you describe God as omniscient, that means he knows everything. If you're studying dinosaurs and they say that a dinosaur was omnivorous, that means he wanted to eat everything. So that's where that comes from. It's the Latin adjective omnis. Our last vocabulary word is a verb, depono, which means to lay down or deposit. Let's look at the four principal parts of this verb. We have depono, deponere, deposui, and depositum. Okay, that fourth principal part, depositum, sounds suspiciously like the English word deposit, right? Well, that's where we get that word from. So this is a third conjugation verb. And as you can see here, it's comprised of two parts, the preposition de and the verb pono. And by itself, the verb pono means to put or place. So just like its compounded version, de pono, the base verb here, pono, is a third conjugation verb. So the four principal parts: pono, ponere, posui, positum. Okay, so you can hear how that's related to English words like position. Also, I believe words like positive are related to this verb. So pono by itself means to put or place. If you put de on the front, de means, literally it means down. So literally de pono means to put down. But it can mean things like set aside. Oftentimes in Latin, you'll see the word pono meaning set aside by itself, even without de. Just pono means oftentimes to put something down or set it aside. But you have to look at the context. But with de on the front, de pono, that's very clearly to put something down, to set it aside, to lay it down. And then we have a kind of an idiom here with the noun memoria. We've seen this before. Memoria means memory. So if you depono the memory of someone, you want to set aside their memory, like get rid of the memory of somebody or something, okay? So if you're reading some Latin and it says that somebody wants to depono memoriam, to get rid of the memory of someone, you can translate that as, they want to blot out the memory of a person or thing. And that's why they have blot out here as the meaning for depono along with memoriam. It's kind of an idiomatic use, similar to when you see bellum gero. Gero means to bear or carry, but along with bellum, it means to wage war. They have sort of a special meaning that they get when they go together, an idiomatic kind of meaning. So it's kind of like that. Okay, let's move on now to section 212, and we're going to talk about a model sentence, and this is going to help us learn about a special use of the genitive case. As I've said before many times, the authors of this book don't always call things by the same names that we often do. There are different grammatical terms that people call things, and this book is over 100 years old, and so sometimes they call things by different terms. So if you took a Latin course right now, today, the teacher would probably refer to this usage of the genitive as the objective genitive. The term they call it here in this book is just the genitive with adjectives. That's their little, term for it. And that's fine. But if we want to be a bit more specific, we can call this the objective genitive, okay? So what is there that's objective about it? Well, let's take a look and I'll show you what's objective about it. Okay. In fact, section 213 is helpful. Let's read that together. The genitive is used to complete the meaning of many adjectives, denoting desire, knowledge, memory, fullness, power, and their opposites. So what they mean there is similar to the way we use the word of in English sometimes. In English, when we translate the genitive case, we often use the word of. We say the top of the mountain, the front of the car, the cover of the book. But we also use that word of in other ways to denote some of the same things they refer to here: knowledge, memory, fullness, power. What if I say someone is mindful of their manners? Okay, it means that they're keeping in mind their manners. What if I say someone is knowledgeable of fishing? That means that that person knows a lot about fishing, okay? So the objective genitive is objective in the sense that when you use a genitive that way, it's like if you say someone is knowledgeable of fishing, it means they know fishing. So fishing is the thing they know, and in that sense, it's the object of what they know. If you say they're mindful of manners, then the thing they are mindful of is the manners. So in that sense, the manners are the object of what they're keeping in mind. If I say, I am afraid of spiders, then that's the same as if I said, I fear spiders. So again, in that sense, the way I stated it with a genitive is an objective genitive because the spiders really are the thing I fear. I fear them, so they're like an object, a direct object, you see. So this is what we call the objective genitive. So let's look at our model sentence here in section 212. Orgeterix erat Cooperdust regni. Okay, Orgeterix is someone's name, one of the Gallic tribesmen. Erat means he, she, or it was. That's a verb of being. Cooperdust is one of our new adjectives for this lesson. It means desirous. It's masculine, nominative singular, because it needs to agree with Orgeterix. Okay, Orgeterix was desirous. So the word Cooperdust, as an adjective, needs to agree with Orgeterix in case, number, and gender. I think this is what you call a predicate adjective. Okay, so Orgeterix was desirous, and then what's the rest of the sentence? Regni, that's a genitive singular of the neuter second declension noun regnum, which means kingship. And here they translate it as royal power. I've mentioned before that regnum doesn't necessarily mean a kingdom as in a place that you rule over, but it means the right to rule or the power to rule or the state of being king. It can mean a place you rule over, but that's not the primary, meaning of it. So regni is genitive singular, and so the sentence says Orgeterix was desirous of kingship. So that's an objective genitive. He's desirous of kingship, but it's objective because it's the object of his desire. It's the object of what he wants. He desires kingship. So in that sense, it's the, object of his desire. So that's why we call it an objective genitive. Okay, let's move on now to our translation section for this lesson. That's section 214. Let's do all the exercises except 16 and 22. Don't do those. So go ahead and translate those on your own, turn the recording off, and when you're ready, turn the recording back on and we'll go over them together. Okay, hopefully by now you've completed your homework assignment. Let's go over the exercises together. Number 1 says, Facile iter. Not really a full sentence, just more of a little phrase to practice with. Okay, we have the noun iter here. That's a neuter noun of the third declension. Iter means things like route, way, road, journey. And modifying the noun iter, we have a third declension adjective, facile, which means easy. This is an adjective of 2 endings, so Focalis would be masculine or feminine, but in the neuter we have facile. Okay, so facile iter means easy route, easy journey, easy way, things like that. Moving on to number 2. Number 2 says, facili itinere. Here we have the same words as in exercise number 1. The only difference is that now they are in the ablative singular. So iter is now itinere. And the third declension adjective facilis is now facili. And I believe that the reason the authors of the book are giving you this particular exercise is that they want you to take note of the difference in the ablatives. They want you to see that for an adjective, the ending is a long I, but for a noun, the ending is E. Of course, we noticed already that there are a few third declension nouns that have an ending of I. Some of the I stems you'll see with that ending. But my point here is that they want you to notice that generally the ablative singular ending for a noun in the third declension is E, but for an adjective, it's I. So they put those two together there to demonstrate that or illustrate that. So again, it says easy route, but because it's ablative, we need to express the meaning that's conveyed by the ablative case. We can treat it as an ablative of means and say, by means of an easy route. I've also heard in the past of an ablative of route. So we could say, by way of an easy root. It doesn't really matter whether you treat it as an ablative of means or ablative of root, it's still basically the same thing. So let's say for number 2, we'll translate it as by an easy route. Number 3, potens natio. Here we're practicing with a third declension adjective of one termination. The word potens means strong, powerful, something like that. And here it's paired with the noun natio, a feminine noun of the third declension, which means nation. So potens natio says powerful nation. Number 4, per potentes nationes. Here we have the same words as in number 3, but now they're the object of the preposition per, which means through. So we see them both in their accusative plural form. Notice that for the noun here, nationes, we have es as the ending for the accusative plural. For the adjective, potentes, we have es as well. But if you'll remember, in the paradigm chart for potens, we saw that you can also have is as the ending in the accusative plural. That's because third declension adjectives decline like I stems. So we just as easily could have seen this as per potentes nationes. So for number 4, we can translate it as through powerful nations. Number 5 is next. Ab forti puero. Puero is a form of the second declension masculine noun puer, which means boy. Forti, that's the ablative singular form of one of our new adjectives for this lesson, the third declension adjective fortis. That's an adjective of 2 terminations. And why are forti and puero ablative? Because of the preposition ab. That's the preposition ab. You see it spelled 2 different ways. It takes the ablative. So forti means brave, puero means boy, and so number 5 says, by the brave boy. Now, where would you see this kind of expression with ab and then a person? Does it mean by the brave boy, as in next to the brave boy? Like, where's the cat? Oh, he's standing over there by the brave boy. No, that's not what this means. The preposition ab here means by in the sense of action done by. So in Latin, when you have a passive verb and something is being done, often you'll see the preposition ab to show by whom the action was done. So we call this an ablative of agent. So possibly there was some action performed, and someone says, who did that action? And number 5 could be an answer to that. It was done ab forti puero, by the brave boy. Ablative of agent. Okay, moving on to number 6. Ab fortibus pueris. Same thing, we have an ablative of agent with the preposition ab. Pueris is ablative plural. Fortibus is ablative plural. That's one of our new adjectives for this lesson. So number 6 says, by the brave boys. Number 7, recens victoria. Victoria means victory, that's feminine, and recens is one of our new adjectives for this lesson. That's an adjective of 1 termination, just like potens. So recens here is feminine along with victoria. And so number 7 says, recent victory. Number 8 is next, recens proilium. Okay, proilium means battle, and that's a neuter noun of the second declension. Why do they have this exercise here? Because they want to emphasize to you that recens here is neuter, but it looks the same as it did in number 7. So the authors of the book have crafted this exercise to help you practice with this neuter form. In number 7, recens was feminine. Now in number 8, recens is neuter. So they're illustrating to you that it's an adjective of 1 termination, same in feminine as neuter. So number 8 says recent battle. And we'll see some of these same words again in number 9. Number 9 says, ante requintem victoriam. The preposition ante means before, and it takes the accusative case. So number 9 says, before the recent victory. Number 10 is next, graves gladii. Here we have a second declension noun, but with a third declension adjective modifying it. Okay? Gladii means swords. It's nominative plural. So graves is nominative plural, modifying gladii. So number 10 would say something like heavy swords. Number 11 is next, omne frumentum. Okay, frumentum is a second declension neuter noun that means grain. And then omne, well, that's one of our new third declension adjectives for this lesson. It's an adjective of 2 terminations, so we get omnis in the masculine and feminine, nominative singular that is, but omne in the neuter. So omne is neuter along with frumentum, and so it means all the grain. Number 12 is next, omnia sua oppida. Oppida is the second declension neuter noun oppidum, which means town. Here it's plural, either nominative or accusative plural. We don't really know. Both of those forms are spelled the same. Of course, we don't really have any context here to know what case it is because it's not a complete sentence. It's just a sentence fragment. So oppida means towns. Could be nominative plural, could be accusative plural. It's being modified by the adjective suis, sua, suum, which means his, her, or its. Again, sua could be nominative plural, could be accusative plural. We just don't know because both of those forms look the same. Either way, it's modifying oppida. So sua and oppida together say his own towns, her own towns, or its own towns, or maybe even their own towns. We just don't know. Finally, we have omnia, and it's also modifying oppida. So here we have 2 adjectives piled up modifying the same noun. Okay, omnia is one of our new third declension adjectives for this particular lesson. It's an adjective of 2 terminations, omnis in the masculine nominative singular, also omnis in the feminine nominative singular. In the neuter nominative singular, we have omne. So technically speaking, number 12 could say all his own towns, all her own towns, all its own towns, or all their own towns. It could say any of those. We don't really know who the towns belong to. In Caesar's Gallic Wars, we see this little phrase applied to the Helvetii, so we translate it there as all their own towns. But on its own, we don't know who it's referring to. What we do know is that suis, sua, suum, as an adjective, refers to the subject of the clause. So whoever is doing the action in that area of the sentence, that's who it belongs to. If it's somebody else, we see the word eius. That's E-I-U-S. So if it said omnia eius oppida, it would mean all the towns of somebody else, of someone other than the subject. But number 12 can be all his own towns, all her own towns, all its own towns, or all their own towns. A good term to know here is the term reflexive. Reflexive words are words that refer back to the subject of the sentence, back to the speaker, perhaps. In Latin, we have reflexive pronouns. We have reflexive adjectives of possession, like these. Suis, sua, suum is a reflexive, possessive adjective because it refers back to the subject. So the term reflexive is a good term to be familiar with. Number 13 is next, eorum omnium. Here we have a form of is, ea, id, which we studied a few lessons ago. Here it's in the genitive plural, eorum, so it means something like of them. And then omnium is here modifying it. Omnium is a form of omnis. That's one of our new adjectives for this lesson. It's a third declension adjective. Notice that omnium is genitive plural, and it has that extra I there before the um ending. So it's not omnum, it's omnium. That's a characteristic that you might see with third declension I stem nouns. Okay, so it has that I stem style of genitive plural ending. So number 13 might say something like of them all, or of all of them. Number 14, cum omnibus copiis. The word copiis here, that's a first declension feminine noun, copia. In the singular, it means things like supply. In the plural, it can mean troops. And so that's probably what it means here. It's ablative plural because it's the object of the preposition cum. Okay, so cum copiis, with the troops, and omnibus is here. That's one of our new adjectives for this lesson. It's the adjective omnis, and it means all. So cum omnibus copiis says with all the troops. Number 15 is next. Gallia omnis. Gallia is a place. That's the area known as Gaul, and it's being modified by omnis, which means all. So simply put, number 15 says, all Gaul. It kind of rhymes. Let's skip number 16 and go to number 17. Milites erant periti belli. The subject here is milites. That means soldiers, and that's nominative plural. Erant is the verb. That means they were. Periti is an adjective that means experienced. Okay, so milites erant periti says the soldiers were experienced. Finally, we have an objective genitive, which is belli. That's a form of the noun bellum that means war. So belli is genitive singular. So literally, number 17 might say this: the soldiers were experienced of war. And I just now checked Allen and Greenough to get some clarity on this. Here's the idea. According to Allen and Greenough, even when something is more of just an object of reference, it still is technically an objective genitive. It falls under the umbrella of the objective genitive. So this is a difference in idiom between Latin and English. This is illustrating a difference between what might sound natural to an ancient Roman and what might sound natural to an English speaker, okay? If an English speaker were going to word this, we might say, the soldiers were experienced in war. But in Latin, you can say this using an objective genitive, just like we studied in section 212 and 213. So here in 17, when you say the soldiers were experienced of war, that in Latin conveys the idea of the soldiers were experienced with reference to war. Or, as we might say in English, the soldiers were experienced in war. Now, there's another way you could say this in Latin. You could use an ablative of reference. We'll learn about that later. But for right now, just keep in mind that you can use an objective genitive with the adjective peritus, experienced. You can say someone is experienced of something, and it means that they're experienced with reference to that thing or in that thing, okay? So here we're seeing an example of an objective genitive that doesn't really look like the others. It's more of a genitive of reference kind of objective genitive. So we can translate number 17 as the soldiers were experienced in war. Number 18 is next. Praeda erit fortibus viris. The subject of the sentence is praeda, which means booty or plunder, and erit is a future tense form of sum. It means he, she, or it will be. So the subject and verb together will say, the plunder will be. Now we have these two dative plurals, and we have to figure out what to do with them, okay? Viris is the noun. That's the second declension masculine noun, vir, which means man. And fortibus, that's one of our new adjectives for this lesson. It's a third declension adjective, and it's dative plural along with viris. Okay? Fortis means brave, and so fortibus viris, those two words together, seeing as how they're in the dative plural, they'll mean something like to the brave men or for the brave men. So literally, number 18 could say, the plunder will be for the brave men, or the plunder will be to the brave men. And we could just leave it like that. We could just say, the plunder will be for the brave men. And that makes sense. But as you may have noticed, there's a footnote here that says, see section 115. Okay, and when you turn back to section 115, it's talking about the dative of possession. Remember that the dative case can be used to show possession along with a verb of being. If you say in Latin that something is to someone using the dative, it means that they have it. Mihi is dative, it means to me, right? So if I say, gladius est mihi, literally, a sword is to me. That's a Latin way of saying, I have a sword. And oftentimes you'll see the verb of being coming first, like, est mihi gladius. There is to me a sword. Okay, that's a classic example of the dative of possession. It's the same as if I said, I have a sword. So, number 18 here, they're trying to tell us here that it's a dative of possession. So the way you could really translate this into English would be, the brave men will have the plunder. Number 19 is next. Legio fuit cupida praedae. Here we have a very straightforward example of an objective genitive. Okay, legio means legion. Fuit means was. That's a perfect tense form of sum. It's not imperfect like erat. It's perfect tense. Cupida is an adjective that means desirous, and it's feminine because it's modifying the feminine noun legio. So legio fuit cupida says, the legion was desirous. And then we have an objective genitive, praedae, to complete the meaning of it. Praeda means plunder. We just saw that in number 18. So number 19 says, the legion was desirous of plunder. Number 20 is next. Pedites erant veloces et fortes. The subject here is pedites, that's nominative plural, and it means foot soldiers or infantrymen. Ped there means foot in Latin, so pedites means the soldiers who are on their feet, infantrymen. You know, in an army, you have cavalry who ride horses, but pedites are the ones who are standing on their feet, okay? The verb here is erant, that's an imperfect tense form of sum. It's third person plural, so it means they were. So the subject and verb together says, the foot soldiers were. And then we have two predicate adjectives to tell us what they were. Veloces means fast or swift. And then fortes means brave. These are both new adjectives for this lesson, these new third declension adjectives we've been studying. So number 20 says, the foot soldiers were swift and brave. Number 21 is next. Iter persequanos erat angustum et difficile. Iter per provinciam nostram facile. In this particular exercise, we have a comparison of two different routes. It's saying that the route that goes through the Sequani is one way, but the route that goes through our province, meaning the Romans, is a different way. So that route has one characteristic. This route has another characteristic. So let's look at the first half of the sentence, which tells us about the route or route that goes through the sequani. Okay, iter means route, way, journey. The verb is erat, which means was. And then we have a predicate adjective, angustum, that means narrow. It's neuter in form because iter is neuter, so it has to match. And difficile means difficult. That's one of our new third declension adjectives. So the skeleton of this particular part of the sentence says, the journey was narrow and difficult. Actually, the word angustum can also mean difficult. But here it's probably better to say narrow because we already have a different word saying difficult. Then we have a prepositional phrase, per sequanos. Per takes the accusative, and per means through. So literally it says the route through the sequani was narrow and difficult. So the first half of the sentence really isn't so hard. It's very straightforward. Second half of the sentence says this, iter per provinciam nostram facile. Now you may notice something missing from the second half of the sentence. The word erat is not there. So let's look at the second half. Iter means journey, route, or way. And then we have facile, which means easy, but there's no verb here. There's no word like erat, okay? Per provinciam nostram means through our province. So literally the second half of the sentence says, the route through our province, easy. Okay, so in languages, there's something you should know about called understood words, okay? Sometimes in languages, when you're translating or looking at, various texts, you'll see places where a word is implied and you have to just sort of throw it in, even though it's not actually in the text itself, okay? So in this second part of the sentence, the word erat is not there, but it's implied. So if you wanted to, you could just add it in. You could take out a pencil and write the word erat between nostram and facile, and it would say this, the route through our province was easy. So that's the intended meaning of the second half of the sentence. But the word erat is not there. So the way we describe it is we say that the word erat is understood. It means the reader needs to understand that word is implied, even though it's not actually there in the text. So in the second half of the sentence, the word erat is understood, and so it means the route through our province was easy. And in the answer key, I put the word was in parentheses, as I always do with understood words, so that you know it's understood, but not actually in the text. Let's skip number 22 and go to number 23. Number 23 says, Romani cum Germanis equestri proelio contendebant. The subject here is Romani, that means Romans, and the verb here is contendebant. Contendebant is a form of the verb contendo, which means to strive, fight, or hasten. Contendebant is imperfect tense, third person plural. The imperfect tense oftentimes communicates continuous action in past time. Here, contendebant means fight or strive. That's what strive means. It means to struggle with someone in the sense of maybe fighting, but probably fight is the best translation here. So to communicate the idea of continuous action, we'll say the Romans were fighting. That way it sounds like it was happening over time. Not just one action, but a continuous action. Okay, so the Romans were fighting. That's what Romani and contendebant say together. Now let's fill in the other words. Cum Germanis is fairly straightforward. That means with the Germans. Cum is a preposition that takes the ablative, and Germanis is ablative plural. So what that gives us so far is the Romans were fighting with the Germans. Now we have two words left remaining that we have not yet translated. That's equestri and proilio. Proilio is the ablative singular form of proilium, which means battle. That's a second declension neuter noun. And it's being modified by one of our new adjectives for this lesson. That's the third declension adjective, equester. Okay, here, equester is ablative singular, neuter, so it's equestri. Notice the letter I there is the ending. It's a long I. So equestri and proilio together, they say cavalry battle. So why are they ablative? How do they add up grammatically? In Latin, the ablative case can express about 1 million different things. There are so many different kinds of ablative case use. There's the ablative of quality, the ablative of specification, the ablative of means or instrument, the ablative of separation, the ablative of description. There are just so many ways to use the ablative case. The idea here is that the Romans were fighting with the Germans in a cavalry battle. That's how we would say this in English. So equestri and proilio, in their ablative form here, they communicate the idea of in cavalry battle. Notice that the preposition in is not here. In Latin, you don't need that because the ablative case communicates that just by virtue of the case itself without any help from a preposition. So if you were sitting in a Latin class right now, the teacher would probably start asking you the question, what kind of ablative is proilio? What flavor of ablative? Is it ablative of description, ablative of means, ablative of specification, ablative of description? Frankly, I don't know what technically this is. It looks probably the closest thing I could guess would be ablative of specification. It's not really ablative of means because ablative of means is like an instrument or a tool you use for something. Ablative of manner usually has the preposition cum with it. It doesn't really match the way I've seen ablatives of description. So anyway, it looks to me like this is probably an ablative of specification, although I'm not really sure. So we have all these different names for the different kinds of ablatives, the different uses of the ablative. And sometimes it can be really helpful to figure out which use it is, to figure out the name of it. Sometimes you hear these names referred to as syntactical categories. You know, what category of ablative is it? So at times it can be very helpful. Other times it can be not helpful at all to try to figure out what kind of ablative it is. And so it seems like in this particular instance, figuring out the name of the ablative isn't really all that helpful. Here you just have to understand the flavor of meaning that the ablative is communicating. And so attaching a name to it may or may not actually help you. Some Latin teachers really harp on this. They want you to know the name every time, the actual name of the ablative. Other Latin teachers, they don't care so much. They don't really care about all the names for the different categories. So it just depends on the teacher. But anyway, what I do know is that it means, in English, in a cavalry battle. So number 23 says, the Romans were fighting with the Germans in a cavalry battle. Number 24 is next. Caesar recentium injuriarum memoriam non deponet. Okay, the subject and verb here is Caesar and deponet. Of course, Caesar is Julius Caesar. Deponet is a form of the verb depono, which is one of our new verbs for this lesson. It's based on the verb pono, which means to put or place, and that's a third conjugation verb. Pono, ponere, posui, positum. And since it's a third conjugation verb, that means that the E there before the personal ending indicates future tense. So deponet says he, she, or it will set aside or he, she, or it will put down. Okay, so the subject and verb together say, Caesar will not put down, or Caesar will not put aside. And what's the direct object here? What is he not going to put aside? The memoriam. That's accusative singular of the noun memoria, which means memory. Then we have the genitive plural noun injuriarum. That's the noun injuria, which means injustice. So what we have so far says, Caesar will not put down or put aside the memory of the injustices. Then we have a third declension adjective modifying injuriarum, and that's recentium, which means recent. Notice that the genitive plural form of recens, which is recentium, has the letter I there along with the um ending. That's because third declension adjectives generally decline like I stems, okay? So literally, this exercise says, Caesar will not put down or put aside the memory of the recent injustices. But if you look at the top of page 74, where the vocabulary is, you'll notice that it says something special about the verb depono. It says that along with the noun memoria, it means to blot out. So here in number 24, we can translate deponet and memoriam as blot out the memory, okay? So here's how we can translate number 24. Caesar will not blot out the memory of the recent injustices. Number 25 is next. Causticus regnum occupabit, ut civitas sit potens. Okay, here we have a main clause and then a purpose clause starting with the word ut. Let's look at the main clause first. Causticus is the subject and the verb is occupabit. We can translate occupabit as seize, and notice that it's future tense. So the subject and verb together say, Causticus will seize. Regnum means kingship. So Causticus will seize the kingship. And now we have a purpose clause to tell us the purpose for which he's doing that activity. So we'll translate ut as so that. Okay, so Causticus will seize the kingdom so that blah, 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 something can happen. Okay, that's the structure of the sentence. In the purpose clause, the subject is civitas. That means state. And the verb is sit. That's just like est, except subjunctive. So that's a present tense subjunctive. And potens means powerful. It's pretty straightforward. So number 25 says, Causticus will seize the kingship so that the state might be powerful. Number 26 is next. Timemus ne periculum sit magnum. Here we have a clause of fearing. Okay, it starts out with timemus, and that's a form of the verb timeo, which means fear. That's a second conjugation verb, timeo, timere. So timemus here is present tense. So we fear, and then in the actual clause of fearing, we have periculum as the subject, sit is the verb, that means is, except it's subjunctive, and magnum means great. So number 26 says, we fear that the danger might be great. Or you could also use a future tense verb to translate it. You could say, we fear that the danger will be great. And before we go away from this exercise, let's remember our little trick for helping ourselves understand the meaning of these clauses of fearing. If we take each part separately, it helps us capture the meaning. For example, if we take timemus, separately, and then ne periculum, blah, 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 take that part separately, here's what we get. We fear. Let not the danger be great. So it's like a little way to get the literal meaning of it, of how this idiomatic usage might have started. Because when you translate it that way, it becomes clear that the thing that you don't want to have happen is that the danger is great. So you fear that the danger is great. Or more correctly, we fear that the danger will be great. So when you see a clause of fearing, take each part separately, and that helps you to remember what it's really conveying, what it's really communicating. Okay, that's it for Lesson 25 here in Lenny's Latin class. Remember always to try to speak Latin. Try to say something in Latin each day, and that will help you learn the language faster and better. Don't think of Latin as something that sits in a museum display case that you cannot see or touch. Don't be afraid to open the display case and get Latin out and interact with it, touch it, play with it, say things in the language, listen to the language. Get in there and interact with the language as much as you can in a spoken kind of way, and that will really help you to learn. Okay, great. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time in Lesson 26.